Geopolitics and Empire is joined by Jonny of the Staying Free podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Yeah, this is probably unusual. It's in person, on the ground interview. We're here somewhere in Mexico, at the beach in Puerto Vallarta, and so I've been listening to your podcast for a while. You've had some of the same guests that I've had on. I really like what you're doing, and I just happened to be going to the beach, so I said, why don't we do this in person? And it's always great to meet like-minded people. So maybe just to start, if you want to tell us whatever you want to tell us about yourself and the work that you're doing at Staying Free.
Yeah, sure. So, thanks again for having me on, and thanks for the kind words about my podcast. I'm a big fan of yours as well. I guess my story, probably as with like many people, it kind of, that my real big moment where my life changed quite significantly was kind of off the back of lockdowns and all the rest of it, with everything that was going on with kind of COVID hysteria. So actually at that point, when this was all kind of kicking off, I was traveling. I was living in Australia at the time, but I'd been traveling for around about maybe like a year and a half, close to 2 years. And this all started kind of kicking off, and I realized at that point that, the world was kind of fundamentally changing. So, Melbourne at the time had just gone into a big lockdown. So I decided, okay, like this isn't the time to be here. I'm going to kind of go back to the UK and reset myself. Went back to the UK and was there for a little while. And during that time, I always kind of wanted to get going again. I like traveling. I like going to different places. My plan before then was actually to go to Canada. I wanted to go there, try it out, live there for a bit. But I kind of could sense that the world had fundamentally changed and that Canada had become a place I definitely did not want to go. So when the world started to open up a little bit again, this was kind of May of 2021. We'd just come out in the UK out of a long lockdown. We'd been in some form of lockdown, I think, for 7, if not maybe 8 months, something like that. I mean, we'd had kind of like breaks from it, but it had been bad. It was hard. And I thought, okay, well, where in the world do I want to go? Now that things are opening up a little bit. And Mexico, for me, was like really, really high on that list. It just seemed like the most free place in the world. So I decided, okay, I'll come out to Mexico. Did a bit of traveling initially in Mexico and was just really enjoying that life of just having this freedom that, I'd not felt for a long time. And then eventually kind of, really liked the place. I kind of started making a life for myself here. I decided to get residency and stuff. And then, I've been here basically ever since.
Yeah, I mean, it's just fascinating to meet so many people fleeing to Mexico. I'm an OG. Again, there have been a few commentators saying I'm selling something. I mean, I've been here from 2010, way before any of this, but it's great to see other people fleeing, coming down and, escaping COVID-1984. And just what's sort of your take on, your personal take and what you've gathered from other people around you, as well as perhaps your guests, just your take on COVID-1984, COVID-9/11, what's going on, and what people also call the Great Reset. Just what's your take on what's going on?
Yeah, well, I think that COVID, kind of marked this moment for a lot of people where they woke up. I like to think that I've always been like, awake, quote unquote, but actually, like thinking back to it, I still didn't really sense that the world could go as crazy as it did during COVID. And during that time, I kind of realized that everything is on the table in terms of where society goes. Like there is absolutely there's no guarantee that society is going to remain free whatsoever. And if anything, like the world proved that it could go in a completely different direction, and that, we're going to just reverse, many years progress in terms of like how we respect each other's, human rights and stuff. I thought that, lockdowns was bad enough. And then when, I was very sure with the whole vaccine narrative that, I don't know how much we can talk about it on your channel, but
speak freely.
Okay. Yeah. So like, when that started coming around, in, I think it was about April or May of 2020. And, the whole vaccine thing started coming around. And at that point it was like, oh, will there be a vaccine? And I was very sure. I remember I've got a tweet and I can still refer to it now. I said at that time, there will be a vaccine. and you will be forced to take it. When everyone else was talking about, will there be one? Maybe we'll get there. How long will it take? I was like, not only will there be one, absolutely, with certainty, and I'll put my life on that, they will try to force everyone to take it. And I was very, very sure of it. I could see the narrative going in this way. And I think that everything that happened during that time indicated to me that like we need radical change. We need people to actually, say no, and not just that, but like kind of essentially fight against it. Like if we keep going, and for me personally, I guess I'd always kind of thought, the world, maybe it's not as it seems, and maybe there's things that aren't as I want them, but I don't necessarily have to kind of like enter this battle. It's like I can just kind of do my own thing, and I realized that like there is a war on for like human freedom, and you can pretend that war isn't happening, but it's still happening, right? Like it's happening there in the background. So you can either kind of be essentially some kind of a foot soldier in it, or you can sit back and hope the war is won. But personally, I got to a point where I thought, okay, I actually am going to fight against this stuff. So I got involved with, the freedom community in the UK, going out to protest and things like that. And then, kind of my Twitter got bigger and stuff from like posting videos and, pictures from the protests and kind of talking about the stuff that was going on. And then, that kind of like eventually one thing after another led to me kind of doing the podcast and stuff like that. So I've probably moved a little bit away from the original question, but essentially like for me, it was my general thoughts about everything that's happened is that something has happened here that like, we're not just being stubborn, like, oh, we're not letting go of this thing. Like it was almost like a warning shot heard around the world that like, we're moving into a new kind of world here. We're moving into something, very different and very dark, and we should probably pay attention to it. And, I think that's been the case for a lot of people, that was just, it was almost like the straw that broke the camel's back. It was the thing that was undeniable that we'd moved into this new paradigm essentially. And, we all need to take notice of that.
I'm going all the way up. I'm going all the way up. I'm letting go in my heart of everything that holds me down. Look up to the sky and I got this relief inside, and there's no need to hide. I'm going all the way up. I'm going all the way up. I'm letting go in my heart of everything that holds me down.
If you do find yourself stuck in a smart city, the Nomos app will help you survive COVID-1984 and the Great Reset. Nomos is a time bank that can be used by communities anywhere in the world. You just need to talk people into using it. I've spoken to the developer who is passionate about creating solutions for surviving and thriving in the apocalypse. Nomos is available in English and Spanish, so hurry and visit nomos.net before they roll out the cashless society and put you in the algorithm ghetto. For me, in some ways, it's still unbelievable how many people we come across, and they don't think twice about what's going on. They still sort of ignore this idea that everything that's going on there's sinister intent. They just say, oh, there was some sort of pandemic and we were told to do this, and they just get on with life and not realizing it's like you're living in a city or a town or a country, an invading army is coming and, lobbing missiles, and you're just pretending like it's not happening. But have you given to, any just along these lines, any further thought as to who's behind this or their agenda? Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess looking back at it now, I probably should have should have seen this coming a bit more, because I've always been quite strong in caring about things like economic freedom, and I'm big into like Bitcoin and stuff like that, and I've looked into central banking and the nature of the money system and fiat currency and how much corruption there is there. And I guess that I didn't necessarily know like what the world would look like when some of these kind of really corrupt institutions kind of start to reach their ultimate conclusion. I didn't necessarily sit down and think, okay, well, this is what it's going to look like, but actually thinking back about it now, I maybe should have been a bit more aware that this is exactly what we should have expected, control mechanisms coming in, and I think that we're going to see that more and more, like the pandemic, whatever your views are on, whether there was a virus, is a virus, how, deadly the virus is, etc. Like people vary on thinking about those things. But what we do know, and what I do know now, is that, it's enabled the powers that be to kind of bring about a control mechanism. And I think that my belief is it all kind of ultimately stems from the money system. I think that they know that the fiat end game is approaching, and that they needed a way to kind of essentially have other mechanisms of control over people. And especially when they want to bring in things like CBDCs and all the rest of it, you need certain things in place in order to do that, because otherwise people won't go into that reality. So it's almost kind of like this priming people. So, we could talk about particular institutions like the WEF and stuff, which I absolutely think have a lot to do with this. But I actually think that they're acting on incentive structures themselves. Let's zoom out a level further and say, like, who are these people? Essentially, they're the monopolists, the oligarchs, the governments, the big corporations, etc. That I think can see that with this fiat paradigm coming to an end, I think they can see that their power is going to be vastly diminished on the other side of that if they don't. If they're not the kind of architects of the next epoch of how we live our lives. And I think they can see the fiat paradigm is coming to an end, so they want to build the next thing. And the next thing looks, very much like, we can call it the New World Order, the Great Reset, whatever you call it. But it involves these institutions having a lot of control over people's lives. They're trying to put in place a kind of global technocracy at the end of the day. So, yeah, I mean, I don't look too much into the specific individuals or institutions, more that I look at the incentive structures that are at play and how that actually like results in the world that we're seeing. And I think that whichever group you kind of point the finger at, we know that it looks like more centralized authoritarian control over populations.
Yeah, I think that's also a healthy way to go about it, and maybe get your thoughts on the economy as well as crypto, because I know you deal with that as well. And a lot of people talk about this, huge collapse of the economy. People I've had on the podcast, Peter Schiff and others, for decades have been talking about this total collapse, which hasn't yet come, which doesn't mean it's not going to. But I think we're already starting to see signs. This inflation, it's not going away. It's 10% plus in some areas of the world, or in some parts of the economy. Even here in Mexico, you've got things that are going up 10%, 20%, 30%, 40%. I'm just from this week. On the TNT show, I was looking at the news from Sri Lanka. They can't send some of their kids to school because there's not enough money. Papua New Guinea airplanes grounded, no fuel. Pakistan, they're shutting the malls early. The government said shutting down shopping centers early to save energy. Just France, a big food producer in France, is shutting down half of its services. Even here in Puerto Vallarta, I was told at the Walmart, a lot of empty shelves, which is kind of not usual. And so you're starting to see this deterioration of the economy all over the place. I am seeing a lot of, I was in the US recently, and even here in Mexico, a lot of help wanted signs. Like they need workers, there aren't workers. That begs the question, were they injured from something? Or was it that they just got used to the stay-at-home pandemic lifestyle? Maybe they've been getting free money, and so your thoughts on the economic situation in general?
Yeah, I mean, I think that we're kind of at a point, with the economy where this we've been essentially living under, a kind of Keynesian standard like across the world for such a long time, and it's all essentially built on a house of cards, right? Like, we're essentially just printing money out of nowhere. Like that's, we have like deficit funding of governments. This has been going on for like a long time, and it's the way that we've had this growth effect, really. Like it's all been based upon nothing. It's not been based on, like real value. It's been based upon like, we'll just like print money, we'll that eventually leads to where we are now. I think that it's happened in the past. There are actually like historical parallels to this. If you look at kind of like the fall of Rome and things like this, one of the things they were doing during that time is they were like clipping coins and stuff, right? So like they were trying in order to kind of like finance the Roman Empire. They were basically taking coins that had been worth a certain value and they were clipping them, and then you would get a clipped coin and they would say, okay, well, like now we take you skim off the top essentially. And we've been essentially doing the same thing for a long time. It's just like we just print money, we do quantitative easing, we take interest rates down to artificially low levels and all this kind of stuff, and that just creates an economy that it lasts so long, but it can't last indefinitely. Even the way that money comes into existence, and you look into kind of banking and stuff, when you buy a property and you think that, okay, well, this property is worth so much money. That money is just getting essentially printed into existence by the retail banks. They don't actually have to really hold any reserves. It's not like someone else's savings. They're saying, okay, well, we'll take this person's savings and then we'll loan it out, and this person can buy a house. The money is brought into existence from nothing, and then you have to pay it back with interest, and that interest doesn't really exist. It's just kind of getting passed around the economy in debt. And this all has kind of led to the conclusion where we are now, which is that everyone's dependent upon this kind of like cheap money. But I think it's clear that the system can't perpetuate forever like this. So I think we're kind of starting to see a realignment and of what is like really valuable. And I think that now that this game is over, it's manifesting in very, very strange ways. COVID, it was just one example, because I think that they're trying to create a world in which, first of all, okay, well, authoritarianism is kind of accepted as just a norm. It's also got the added effect of, okay, we need to ban cash because, cash is dirty or whatever. We need to all use digital cash. And eventually, I think with the economic collapse, they're going to need a way to get money into people's hands so that people aren't, going around rioting or whatever they're going to do. So the way that they're going to try and do that is they're going to say, okay, well, you can have your UBI, you can have some government money. We're going to put it into some digital wallet, and that's how you can go out and spend. But they don't want to give it to anybody, right? Because there's certain things that you have to do, because, why bring in a CBDC unless you're going to have attachments to it? So, they're going to say, oh, well, have you taken your vaccine, this month? Have you done this? Have you said something bad on the internet? Essentially, it's kind of all becoming part of the same thing. Like, the authoritarianism and the CBDCs, it's just one giant package, right? And that's going to look really, really bad for the individual, but it's the only way they can go with the fiat system. So obviously, I am a big advocate for stuff like Bitcoin, because I think that that's almost like the people's way of getting away from this stuff. It's kind of our way of saying, no, we're going to do it on our terms. We're going to decide if we're going to like move out of this fiat paradigm. We're going to have money, we want it to be our money. We want it to be under our own protocol. We want it to be created based upon genuine kind of work. And, in the case of Bitcoin, like proof of work, etc. So I do think that is an option to get away from it. But in the case of the people who are kind of pushing this stuff, they still want to have control the other side of this. And to what you were saying with inflation stuff, I don't think that this is going to stop. I think that we are at the beginning of a hyperinflationary cycle now that I think will result in the end of currencies. And these have happened in the past, but normally they've been isolated to one particular country. Now we actually have a situation where the reserve currency is no longer gold for most economies. I don't even know if there's any that have are reserved by gold. They're reserved by the US dollar, and the US dollar is essentially unreserved itself. So you're going to have a collapse, I think, of every single currency across the world, because if the reserve asset, the US dollar, collapses, well, everything that is built on top of that is going to collapse as well. So I think that we can expect to see a continuation of this, and things of real value, like they're going to go up in value a lot. Things that are truly scarce, things like energy, things like oil, those things are going to essentially rise in value proportionate to the collapse of fiat currency. So I think it's going to continue, and this is why I think it's going to get pretty dark for a lot of people. But I think the main thing is to kind of be aware of what's actually going on, so that people can make those rational choices for themselves and their families and their communities, so that they go in a direction which is, in my view, you have two options. You can either become more self-sovereign, or you can accept the CBDC's stuff, and you might be given a relatively good life. You might be kind of happy, sitting at home and like eating bugs and all the rest of it, and getting your monthly vaccine and taking your hand out from the government. But for those people who don't want that life, I think it's important to like be aware of like what's actually happening, what's happening on a financial level and on a political level and everything, and making like conscious choices for how you escape that, basically.
I think even if you submit to the CBDC system initially, there'll be a honeymoon period, but then I think soon the walls will start closing in, and they're going to become diabolical with the things that they want to do with you. But just on that line of the digitalization, and then as well as in Mexico, a lot of people have said flee to places like Mexico. Not just Mexico. There's a lot of people going to Uruguay, Latin America, that I know, places in Africa, Southeast Asia, other parts of Asia, and whatnot. My view is that coming to a place like Mexico, you're buying time only, versus staying somewhere in Europe or the West. This was my idea by fleeing. My plan was to go live in Croatia, and when all of this happened, I fled Kazakhstan back to Mexico. Then I've had guests on that have said the same thing, that this algorithm ghetto technocracy is going to first hit first world countries, developed nations, and it'll take longer to get to developing nations. So again, other people have confirmed my thoughts, but I think that this stuff can still be quickly applied here in places like Mexico. We've seen governors, the governor of Jalisco, where we are now, he's said he wants to change the state constitution. Mandated vaccines are illegal. He wants to change the state constitution of Jalisco to make legal mandatory vaccination. He proposed the idea of internal Soviet passport. To enter and exit Jalisco, they would require a vaccine certificate. They did have checkpoints, I was told, here in Mexico. Like when you were leaving Jalisco to go to like Colima, a neighboring state, they had checkpoints. They wouldn't let you through unless you proved that you had residency in Colima. And they have this sort of social credit currency called Huzi that they've already deployed in Guadalajara. Like people can, if they ride their bike or do whatever, they get these social credit points that can be converted to pesos. I feel like tomorrow the governor can say, if businesses have to accept QR codes or only credit cards or smartphone payments and no cash, and if they accept cash, like they did with COVID, they were sending out government agencies to businesses to make sure that businesses were forcing customers to use cubrebocas, right? The face masks. And if they weren't, they would be fined, shut down immediately until they pay the fine, clausurado, right? So I feel like even in a place like Mexico, they can do this quickly, although still Mexico might provide you more loopholes. Even if it does happen, it might provide you more ways to get around it than other countries. But just your thoughts on this fourth industrial revolution, the possibility of how soon you see this coming, or if they're going to succeed, and then transitioning to talking about how you see Mexico.
Yeah, so I actually I don't think it will succeed, but I guess I'll kind of come back to that one. Yeah, I think that. Okay, so my belief is that like COVID was their biggest shot at this, and I think that they missed. I obviously they did make a lot of ground, no doubt, and they did kind of desensitize people to a lot of this stuff, especially the idea of lockdowns. And now it seems like they're trying to do the whole climate lockdown thing, and I think a lot of people will fall for that, because they'll say, "Oh, well, I've already had COVID lockdowns. What difference is it? We're doing it for the climate now." I think that there is going to be a kind of constant chipping away, and some people are going to just say, oh well, this is normal now. Now being locked in my home is normal. Whereas it used to be that you need to have kind of committed a crime or something to actually be locked down. Now it's like, okay, well that just happens if my government, there's something they want to lock me down for. So there is going to be a gradual chipping away. Now the thing is, I do think though that with the COVID narrative, I mean, I can't remember. I would love to credit the person who I heard say this, but I can't remember who it is. But they basically said, the first thing that happens, that's going to be the biggest shot. They're going to use the thing they think they have most success with the first time. And I think that for them, that was COVID, right? So I think that they went for they tried to bring the plan into action off the back of COVID. And I don't think it really would. I think that there's a lot more resistance than they thought. I don't think they expected people to kind of be awake to it as much. I don't know what they were exactly expecting, because to me, it was like really obvious that, this wasn't what we were being told. But I think that as a result of that, they kind of missed their number one opportunity to bring us all this stuff about. And I think that because they didn't achieve it from opportunity number one, they're unlikely to be able to bring it about for number 2 or 3, whether that's climate or whether that's, whatever the thing is down the road that they're going to decide. It seems like climate's going to be the thing, that's going to be the next push. So I don't think that it's going to ultimately have much an effect, but that doesn't mean that we're not kind of out of the woods, because I think that they're now using their weaker hand, they're going to have to play their weaker hand. Still, the fiat system is fundamentally broken, right? So we still have a situation that you're going to have hyperinflating currencies and stuff, and I think that that's still going to lead to a lot of hardship in the world. So I think that the hardship that we're going to see, I'm less concerned about the authoritarian stuff than I am about the general result of kind of monetary breakdown. I don't know how that will manifest. Maybe it will manifest in, poverty. Maybe it will manifest in famine. Maybe it will ultimately manifest in war, because war is the tool that they will use to, try to kind of keep the pockets lined of these people who are kind of pushing this stuff. I don't know exactly how that will look, but I'm certainly less concerned about the actual tools of controls, because I think that they've already kind of played their strong hand and not necessarily achieve what they wanted to achieve. Now, coming to your kind of question about Mexico, I think that Mexico, I have a lot of good things to say about Mexico in this respect. I think that Mexico has shown much more resiliency than a lot of places. That's from a number of factors. I don't think it's necessarily all coming from the government or whatever. I'm sure they have good and bad people in the government, people who are bought off and people who aren't, etc. But I think it's more, for me, with Mexico, it's I think the culture here tends to be just a bit more people, it's always been a little bit anarchic anyway. So I think it's got that to say for it. And also I think that geopolitically, where it's positioned, freedom seekers tend to find their way to Mexico. I mean, this happened before COVID, and it's certainly accelerated since. And I think that its proximity to places like America and places like Canada, I think that people have come here to seek freedom, and that's going to kind of build up a resiliency as well. And just the fact that it's kind of easy to move here as well. It was always easy to come here as a tourist. It's relatively easy to get residency. I think that it has a lot of factors that are going to protect it against what's going on. So, I have strong, hopes for Mexico. But as you said, there is still certainly pockets that can kind of become corrupted, and Jalisco does seem to be one of them. Although here in Puerto Vallarta, it seems probably better than it is in Guadalajara. I think the bigger cities are maybe going to face some of this stuff worse than the smaller places, but I think that we've got to be on our toes. But I would say to sum up, generally, I'm less worried about these tools of control. I'm more worried about what's going to happen when the economic system fully breaks down.
Yeah, good point. I've also thought about this, that the control system might not advance as quite as they want it, and then our primary concerns will be, I guess, eating and surviving economically, because jobs will be less available, or they'll pay less, and who knows? I mean, even doing what we're doing, podcasting and whatnot, might not become profitable. Not that my podcast is quite so profitable. So do donate if you've got some extra funds. But just it's interesting to see in Mexico so many people coming down. Like when I've known about your podcast for a while, and I thought you were in the UK, and then it's funny. It's so synergistic. Like you've interviewed Parallel Mike. I've interviewed him, Rick Moon, who I was a guest on his show and TNT in March. You've interviewed him, and he got the job for me, helped me get the gig on TNT. But I thought you were in UK, and then you invite me on your podcast, and you're like, oh, you're here in Puerto Vallarta. I'm like, I just happen to be coming on vacation, and it's just like it's so funny to meet so many people. This month in Morelia is Derek Rose and the whole Greater Reset, and in Mexico last year we had just half hour from here the Libertarian podcast conference. Clint Russell, Buck Johnson, Mark Clare, and others, and so many people are coming down. Josh Sigurdson of World Alternative Media is nearby here. Daniel Estelin's out in Cancun. So many people here. And then maybe, well, before getting to the podcasting and media, maybe just any other thoughts you have on preparing for these hard times. I'm sure you might say buy some crypto. I think it's good to have gold and silver, some property, maybe a lot of non-perishables that you'll be using, weapons, where you can get them. But I think community and network is also very important. So, any thoughts for you on people weathering the storm ahead?
Yeah. So, I mean, I consider myself a Bitcoiner and not a crypto guy. So, I personally think go with hard money. I would put gold above any kind of like crypto, but obviously, I have a lot of belief in Bitcoin. I think that having stuff that's scarce is a good place to be. So, whether that's gold, whether that's Bitcoin, I think just like having scarce assets that are going to show to be or help the individual to be more resilient, essentially against kind of hyperinflation, which is like my number one biggest concern. Because obviously there are things which are really important. Things like if you can, like our friend Parallel Mike, he's really gone to town on the whole, growing your own food and living off grid and having your own electricity. That's all well and good, but my belief is, well, those things will still exist. Everything is still going to be able to be bought with money. But it's got to be hard money, right? So people might not accept your dollars, they might not accept your pesos or whatever your national currency is. But I do think that hard money will still be used because we've always had mediums of exchange. So, maybe that's gold, maybe that's silver, maybe that's Bitcoin. So I think that having those things is really important. So if you can't go, and I have full respect for people who do go the whole hog with, self-sovereignty and living off grid, etc. But if you can't do that, make sure that you own like hard assets. Don't rely on the money in your bank account. I think that once hyperinflation really starts to set in, as we've seen in previous times gone by, people will be taking wheelbarrows of money to go and buy a loaf of bread. And, I don't see any reason why that couldn't happen again. In fact, I think that we are very much on that path. So it might not happen tomorrow, but when it happens, it will probably happen quite quickly. I think that kind of like ramp up will happen very quickly. So I also think personally, being like having no debt is a good place to be. I think that if you are in debt, we talked about this a little bit before actually having this conversation, is that, we're both kind of like minimalists. We're both like anti, being in debt and things like that. And I think that the reason for that is because if you're in debt, like you're easier to be controlled. If you're in debt, it's much easier to say to someone, you've got to do what we want. If you have an unpayable mortgage or something like that, it's much easier for someone to say, okay, well, now you're dependent on it. You're going to lose your house if you don't do this. You got to do this, and then we'll help you with your repayments, whatever it is. So I think that like having as little debt as possible is a good idea. But I would also have some cash. I mean, personally for me here, I keep cash. I go and I take out almost the maximum amount that I can from a cash machine. Every time I go, I don't just like take as much cash as I need. I mean, first of all, it's kind of a cash economy here, so you have to.
Where do you keep it?
So I think that having cash, and the reason I say that is because it's much easier for the powers that be to turn off ATM machines or to call some kind of bank holiday than it is to take everyone's cash. So I think that if you do have a emergency currency situation, shall we call it, they might just turn off the ATMs. You might not be able to go and withdraw your money from the bank because they're bailing out governments and they're bailing out central banks with your money, whatever they're doing. So I think that having cash is useful. So yeah, personally for me, it's a combination of that. It's like having your assets basically like in the right place. But I just say community and stuff helps as well. And I think that also just being like healthy, I think that there's, if you have a healthy body and a healthy mind and you're doing good daily practices, you're going to be much more resilient to this stuff. So I think that like, there's stuff that you can do on that kind of, I guess, more holistic side of things as well to actually kind of prepare yourself, because, you've got to think about what's going to come down the line and kind of visualize and take proactive steps. But I also think that like not getting super kind of caught up in the negative energy. I think like having some like positivity and facing these things like head on, I think it's a good thing to do.
Yeah, it is Cash Friday, although I think it's I've never been big on the Cash Friday thing, because even since I was a teenager, I've been a cash everydayer. Like I never use credit cards, and I always, every single day since I was a teenager, just using cash. I don't see any reason to use credit cards, or I don't even know how to do the phone pay things. It's just for me, it just always made sense from an intuitive perspective using cash, because it's what you have, not having debt, protecting your privacy. No one has to know what I'm buying. And as well as what you say about, I do the same thing. I take as much as I can reasonably out of the ATM just to have that buffer, because they might not be working tomorrow, or they keep lowering the limits. I mean, all over the place you see in Europe, and Mexico's been all right for a while, but yeah, and I buy anything that I know I'm going to need. Like I just bought a second laptop because this one fan broke, and so it's like just anticipating supply chains breaking down or just inflation. Like I'm gonna scoop this up right now. And you mentioned this doom attitude, and I know some listeners of mine. I just want to make you think a bit. Some folks have a real doom mentality, and we were talking about this earlier. Like I have this sort of laugh in the face of danger mentality. They'll take me to the gulag singing and laughing. So you have to be balanced. We can hang out and we were having a meal, drinking coffee, talking about things not necessarily related to this. So we can talk about this stuff at times, at other times, turn it off and live a normal life. But there are people that are just constantly freaking out about 5G this and land confiscation and, government agents being sent to your house and jabbing you 20 times with the Pentagon juice, as I call it, or, and it's just like, at some point, there's only so much you can do, learn about this. Like we were talking about, people send us, the latest interview of the breakdown of what's in the Pentagon juice. And it's like, look, I don't have any more time to watch so many interviews, diapers to change and stuff, and the moon, to look at the night sky, read books and hang out with friends and stuff. And it's like, I know the Pentagon juice is bad. I'm never going to take it. I find it a bit futile to watch so many videos on a weekly basis with the latest, like what's in the juice or whatever. And so I think there has to be a reasonable balance. And so you can't be like, oh, nothing is going on. Like I said earlier, missiles are falling in, la, la, la. Let's pretend that's not happening. You can't be talking about 5G every day. There's got to be a balance. And just, and you've been telling me, you've been meeting some of the freedom folks here who are like that. And like I said, your reaction to this sort of thing.
Yeah, exactly as you say. I think that we have to be like informed enough to kind of like have a healthy level of skepticism, right? But I do think that there becomes a point where if you are kind of like obsessing over it, you're not in the right like mental headspace actually to kind of like deal with all this stuff anyway. And I think that, we have to somewhat live like normal lives, and we have to kind of, we don't want to just become this kind of echo chamber of like really, really intense conspiracy theories and stuff. Like and I'm not even saying necessarily that they're not true, some of this stuff, but I think that, for me, it doesn't really matter. Like, for me, it doesn't matter whether, for instance, the vaccine is, killing loads and loads of people. Of course, like, it matters, but doesn't make it, like, even if someone came and it wasn't killing everyone and someone's putting a gun to my head telling me I'm going to take it, well, I'm not going to take it anyway, because I believe in bodily autonomy. So, we can talk all day about, how many vaccine adverse injuries or this, that, or the other. We can talk about that, and it's important to know about it, but it doesn't change the fundamental nature that someone's coming and telling you you've got to take this product or whatever. The important thing is, do you have sovereignty over your own body, for instance, right? So, like you said, someone, it doesn't really matter to me at this point. It could be much more or less severe than people are saying. But my ultimate thing is, well, I've decided not to take this, and I'm going to stand by that. And once I've made that decision, like, it doesn't matter to me anymore. Like, I can move on to other things, and I can keep myself in a more positive space, and I think that's the important thing. Whereas if you constantly obsessing about some of these things, I'm not saying that we shouldn't get the truth out there. We should, but it's just like, what's your actual response to it? Like, are you staying in the kind of fear mentality, essentially? Like, are you staying in just like a constant state of fear and anxiety? I don't think that that's healthy. So if that's the state that people are in, and I would say, well, look, you've made your decision that you're going to walk away from this thing. You're going to walk away from the CBDCs. You're going to walk away from, the vaccines or whatever it is that someone's trying to coerce you to take. Once you've done that, start thinking about other things. Start thinking about community. Start thinking about self-sovereignty. Like, actually kind of change try to, I guess, just become more like relaxed and because the thing is, when you're constantly in that state as well, it doesn't really kind of do our community any favors, I think, when there's too much negativity there. So I think that, you can take that stance and say, okay, I'm gonna opt out of this thing. But once you've opted out, like, try to then become positive about the things that you're opting into, like whether that's for example, with us, we're into the alternative media space, which is like thriving, like, dig your teeth into something that's positive. Maybe that's growing your own food. Maybe that's whatever. Maybe that's learning about something like Bitcoin. Dig into something that's actually going to help you, but like do it from a positive way. That's what I would say, and I think that's a healthy approach to take.
Yeah, you mentioned alternative media. That was my next question, because if you want to tell us about your Staying Free podcast, you sort of fell into it. I also fell into I never wanted to do a podcast. I wanted to talk to smart people, and that's sort of, I think, that's your thing as well. You wanted to talk to smart people, and it just so happened that organically podcasting was the way to do that. And as you said, like, many things are exploding. Platforms like TNT, podcasting itself, and just your thoughts on the current media scene and where it might be going, as well as the censorship, because I don't feel the censorship is going away. Like, my Patreon, I'm banned. PayPal, I'm banned. Other people have bank accounts closed. And so I think that stuff's going to continue. We see these two conflicting things where the tyranny is continuing, but at the same time, alternative media is going forward and rising, and just, your thoughts on the scene.
Yeah, I personally, it's almost like every year that goes by, I think that alternative media has peaked or is peaking, and then I realize that we're nowhere near the top. And I actually just think that since COVID, that has been a huge moment. It's like we're now living through, I think, the golden age of alternative media. And maybe it won't. Maybe it will just keep going and it will keep getting better. But obviously, like you say, there is issues with stuff like censorship. But I think that we're starting to get to the point now, because the censorship is so widespread, that anyone who goes against that, they kind of create themselves a nice niche, which immediately people flock to. So, like looking at things like, now a lot of people, they're moving away from platforms like YouTube, and they're going to places like Odyssey, or they're going to places like Rumble. In terms of podcasting, my podcast, the Staying Free podcast, it's mainly an audio podcast. I do video and stuff as well. But one of the things I really like about audio podcasts is that it works basically from you have your podcast feed, and you have your host, and that just kind of like then just gets distributed out to all they do is they just pull that content from there, right? So if Spotify suddenly decide to ban me, well, I still exist on iTunes, and I still exist on, Amazon, etc. So it kind of creates this effect where it's like it disincentivizes you from being banned, essentially, because you're still going to exist. It's not like Spotify's pulling your content. You're not hosting it there. So I think that there's ways to get around censorship, and I think that people become very awake very quickly to censorship. Everyone knew it was happening on Twitter. Twitter seems to have obviously, under Elon Musk, whatever you think of him, at least the censorship for now has kind of like dialed back, and I think that that's happened on a basis of us kind of continually knocking on that door. You've got platforms as well, like what's the one where people kind of write articles? It's become really big.
Substack, right?
Substack's become a huge thing. So yeah, I think that there's a lot of like really positive things that are happening there, and also just the fact that the mainstream media has just really made it's so ridiculous now. You can't get any truth from it. I mean, every day you turn on the mainstream media, and the stories are more ridiculous than the last, and people know, I think, intuitively that you're not really going to get the truth from mainstream media and not having to find it through other platforms. And that's just helping like independent producers and, people like independent like journalists and stuff. I think this is a really good time for them. So I'm not sure what there was two parts to your question. I went in on the
just that, I needed thoughts on the media scene, and then maybe your podcast staying free. I think you're doing great, and then where you're trying to take it, and any other projects that you're working on, if you want to mention, or just what's the future for staying free?
Yeah, that was the other thing that you asked. So you asked kind of like the beginnings of that, and yeah, it was very similar to yourself. I just kind of felt like I guess that off the back of the COVID stuff, there were so many people who I'd kind of I guess I knew online and I was communicating with, and they seemed smart, seemed switched on. And I thought, okay, well, let's like create something where I'm actually having conversations. Let's get people out of that Twitter echo chamber, that kind of 280 characters thing where you can't really present like more nuanced side of you or have more nuanced discussions, etc., and have conversations. So I started doing that, and then, just kind of kept going with it really. And that was the main thing, was just like, let's have conversations that are kind of like meaningful. Like there's no shortage with the mainstream media of just like nonsense conversations with the same takes over and over that aren't talking about the interesting or important things in life. And I kind of thought, well, I want to have those conversations. So that was really kind of how it started. And since then, I've been going kind of just over a year now. And like I was saying to you, like before we got going, it's personally been like a really fulfilling experience for me. Like I wouldn't be having a conversation like this, meeting someone like you, and we just, we share kind of so much in common, and we think about things, in similar ways and stuff. And
I like meat, though. You're vegan, so we can get over that, right? So
yeah. I mean, we have a few differences in that respect, but at the end of the day, it's like this. We're creating something different here, because I think that the old world has proved itself to be kind of fundamentally like corrupted, like not just literally corrupted, but also like spiritually corrupted. So if we're going to do something different, if we're going to create a better world, we need to actually kind of come together and do it individually. And since starting the podcast, I've talked to so many people who are along a similar mindset. And the way that I see it is that like this is the way that we win. The way we win is like we kind of raise our consciousness. And rather than, sitting around and living in the metaverse, wearing masks, taking a vaccine every month, whatever it is, like, and living in this fear state, we actually, and also just watching mainstream media and all this kind of stuff, trusting in these, trusting the science or whatever that's supposed to mean, like actually just saying, no, we're going to like have stimulating conversations. We're going to, tune into different media. We're going to like learn and educate ourselves about different things, but also we're going to do it like with a positive kind of energy. I think that's how we win, because those people eventually are going to realize it's a dead end. Just sitting around and being afraid of everything and trusting, your leaders to look after you is going to lead you to bad places. Unfortunately, I think for a lot of people, it's already led them there, because, they might have taken medical interventions that they don't need, and that might have been very, I hope it's not, but that might have been harmful for them. And so I hope that people don't have to learn the hard way. I hope people can learn the easier way. But certainly as time goes forward, I think that more and more people are going to flow over to our camp just because they're going to resonate with the positive energy or whatever. I know that sounds kind of, super hippie, but I do think that's what we're doing here. Like we're doing something more positive. We're offering like some kind of alternative. And, that's why, again, I don't like to go too much into the doomer side of things. I just think like, let's just create something of our own and not ask anything of the system. I don't want any, I don't even spend much time like hating on them. I'm just like, okay, you do your thing, BBC can, put out their message, whatever they want to do. And I'll do my thing over here, and the people will gravitate towards that. But I think that will grow over time because people want positive view of the future, right? I don't think that it's actually kind of a hard sell just saying, okay, you're all just going to live in the metaverse and eat bugs. Like, I think that most people, they might do that out of fear, but they'd rather do things out of love and connection and, all those other kind of like from a good place, basically. So that's where I hope that we're going with this.
Yeah, just what you were saying, even, again, going back to when I was a teenager, my view has always been the sort of Sparta 300, Normandy, D-Day invasion, where sort of feel where, and I saw this, there's that famous YouTuber, I think up in Norway with beard. I saw he did I saw his clip the other day through activist post where he's saying the fight, like to win, the fight is the win or something. Like for me, if I die or I'm in the digital or physical ghetto or whatever, it doesn't matter. Like for me, the victory, the success is like using game theory. Like we did the right thing, the best that we could. What happens regardless is, for me, that's the win. That's all that you could have done. And I think that's the right mentality. You win by doing what's right, resisting tyranny, regardless of the outcome. And so that's how I sort of see things. And is there anything that in between what we've covered that you think is or something else is important that for you, given everything that's going on? Any other important point for you to get across?
No, I mean, I think that, I would probably just suggest, because we've had two conversations today, that like almost the other half of this conversation will be on my podcast. So I guess like there we've already kind of like discussed the other topics I might go into, but yeah, I just want to like thank you for, inviting me on and everything. Like it's been an awesome discussion. It's been really, really awesome, like getting to know you and stuff. I hope that we do this again in the future. It's great having like another like, content creator in Mexico, like pretty nearby in Guadalajara and stuff like that. It's, it's pretty cool. Like just having these experiences makes me realize that like we're on to something, like we're on the right path. All these kind of synchronicities that are happening, it kind of makes me feel like, okay, we're doing the right thing here. So, I guess that's it from me. If people want to kind of check out my podcast, it's Staying Free Pod. That's the Twitter handle, Staying Free Pod. And then if you just search the Staying Free podcast on any podcast platform, you'll get it. YouTube, I do a bit of censoring because I don't want to get strikes. But when the conversation is censored, I always put a censorship message there to let people know that this section has been censored and to listen on other platforms. So I try to put as much of the conversation there as possible. But if you want to listen to the full uncensored conversations, they're available on all the major podcast channels.
Yeah, and thanks for inviting me into your home to invite you onto my
yeah, you're welcome.
podcast. So yeah, that'll do it for this special beach edition of Geopolitics and Empire. I should do more Geopolitics and Empire beach editions. And if you ever make it out to Guadalajara, we'll talk again. And
for sure,
Staying Free podcast. Subscribe there. Jonny's doing awesome work. And well, thanks for being on G&E.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this Geopolitics and Empire podcast. The website is geopoliticsandempire.com, and I encourage you to sign up to the free email list that notifies you of every new podcast and other important updates. The email list and website are our last lines of defense. We're being censored and deplatformed. It's almost impossible to find Geopolitics and Empire on the Google search engine. We've been blacklisted. YouTube frequently strikes videos. Facebook restricts our page. Reddit, Twitter, and LinkedIn take down posts. After the Associated Press mentioned Geopolitics and Empire in a 2021 article co-written with NATO, or the Atlantic Council, our Patreon account was terminated. Vimeo also terminated our Pro account at one point. In April of 2022, the Department of Homeland Security had PayPal ban us for life. The best free way to help Geopolitics and Empire is to leave a review on Apple Podcasts or elsewhere and subscribe to all of our media channels. You can find the video broadcast now on 5 platforms: Odyssey, Rockfin, Rumble, BitChute, and Brighteon. You can find the audio broadcast on the entire podcast ecosystem: SoundCloud, Apple, Spotify, and so on. My current favorite social media channels are Twitter and Telegram, but you can also find us on Gab, MeWe, Minds, Float, VK, Instagram, Facebook, and LinkedIn. You can support this guerrilla signal by donating via DonorBox, Buy Me a Coffee, Subscribestar, or Crypto. You can purchase a consultation with the host to talk about expatriation, geopolitics, or podcasting. You can also become a monthly or annual member via Stripe and receive benefits such as partaking in a monthly member Zoom call, get access to a weekly recording of my random thoughts, and a private Telegram channel. Thank you for listening.